Here, tēnā I te whānau. You know what, this is such an awesome kaupapa. Me hoa ke tātou. Let's get straight into it and delve into it. Nō reira I te whānau to land us in collectively as a rōpū to kick off our journey. I have a few words of karakia that I will share, again, just to collectively pull our minds together and prepare us for this journey today that we're going to have. Nā reira I te whānau, te tawa mai I runga, te tawa mai I raro, te tawa mai I roto, te tawa mai I waho, kia taua I te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, humi, huie. Again, really simply put, summoning all that awesomeness all around me, bringing it in towards me, and then sharing that aroha and that mauri out to everyone else. Mauri ora kia tātou katoa. E runga I tēnā e te whānau. Nei rā toku mihi whakaiti, mihi o kawa kia tautika mai ki tēnei kaupapa e ki anei ko hui taumata. Nā reira I te whānau nau mai, tomo kia mai I tēnei whare ipurangi nei, arahiri mai I rungi I te ero. Karanga ho tā mātou rōpū, nau mai piki mai, tau mai. Tēnā I te whānau, it's my great pleasure to officially launch our kaupapa, our hui taumata today, journeying towards a Tiriti-led mātauranga informed Aotearoa. Even just hearing this kaupapa sounds absolutely amazing. Looking forward to the kōrero that will be shared, or the koha atu and the koha mai that you'll get with this kaupapa today. Before we kick off, we just have a few housekeeping rules there, so if I could get Penny to quickly share the slide there. Just for those people that are like me, that are a great visual person there. So just a reminder, because it can't be too irongi te manakitanga, because there's so many different avenues that we could utilise there. But with our Zoom today, again, a tēnā koa, please mute yourselves unless you're in the breakout rooms. We don't want some funny noise to interrupt some of the awesome kōrero that may be coming out. And also, please, tēnā te whānau, tongi te aroha, please make sure that you turn on your video in the breakout rooms. It's so much easier to see your beautiful kanohi or your beautiful faces rather than a blank screen and your voices disappearing off into a black hole. And again, if you haven't done so already because you're busy landing in, please, e rongi te whanaungatanga, please rename yourself and also add your agency. It just gives us a bit of context of the your background coming into the space. And also note, if you haven't seen already, we're recording this session. Nā reira, tēnā e te whānau. Thank you, Penny. Without further ado, ko tōna te whiu tōku ingoa, no te nota, no ngā puhi whānui ahau. And it's my pleasure as one of the Practice Foundation members to welcome you all officially into this space. But wait, it gets better. Because tēnei te whānau, it's my pleasure now to hand over the rākau kōrero to my beautiful tuakana, tēnā rā I te tuakana Angie. Ngā mihi ki a koe.
Tuatahi, he mihi whakawhetai ki a koe te tuakana mo te karakia me te mihi whakatau I tēnei ata dona. Tēnā koe, inga mana, inga reo, inga kāranga taha maha. Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai piki mai. Nau mai, haere mai I runga I tēnei kaupapa o te rā. Ko wai tēnei e tū ana te pī tonga o hikirangi I Wanganui a koutou. Kia mihi ki o koutou maunga tapu. Ko hikirangi te maunga ko Waiputi awa ko Ngāti Parau te iwi, ko Angie Tangai ahau ko awau, te kaitohu tangata whenua of the Auckland Co-Design Lab. Mōrena e te whānau, I'm Angie Tangai and I'm the Director Tangata Whenua of the Co-Design Lab, and it's my pleasure to be co-hosting this conversation alongside the tuakana Donna this morning. Thank you very much for making the time for these really important conversations. I'm just going to take some time to land us in this morning, and so I'm going to introduce the team in a moment, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of the lab.
Recording in progress.
Talk about the intent of the hui taumata, and then land us into the space with some provocations. So we're just going to take a little bit of time to do that, and then we're going to hear an amazing kōrero from Roi Mata Taniwha Pa'o, landing us in with Hautu Waka. But I'll just get Penny to show, to start screen sharing and show that our amazing team. So te tiro mai e te whānau, have a look at these amazing models straight off the runway of Milan, Rangitukia or Te Tai Tokerau, any of those places. Here's our amazing team. So Donna and I have introduced ourselves, but we've also got Dr. Penny Hagan, who is our kaitohu Tangata Tiriti, and a co-directorship at the lab, myself being the kaitohu tangata whenua, Penny being the kaitohu tangata riti, in a leadership model that acknowledges and values the place of Te Tiriti in Aotearoa. Penny's going to be our kaimanaki for the morning, and I'll come back to that role in a little bit. But we also have our good friend Baruch on the line today. I miss Baruch. He's off doing some amazing things at Whānau Tahi, so it's great to have Baruch on the team today. So if you've got any tech issues, it would be great if you could message Baruch directly through the chat, or you could also message the amazing Lee Ryan, who is also on tech support today. So any immediate tech issues, please message Baruch or Lee through the chat. And we've also got Jess Truss, who's part of our team, and Kiana Kaki as well on the line, doing all of the amazing magic in the background to keep the show running. But I'll just move to talk a little bit about the context of the lab, so you can understand why we might be hosting such an important conversation, not just for the public sector, but for Aotearoa generally. So the lab, I would describe the Auckland Co-Design Lab as a learning and innovation platform that's focused on on systems change for better outcomes for whānau. So we're in a really privileged position to be grounded in place here in South Auckland, nested inside of the Southern Initiative, which is a part of Auckland Council, and I'll show you in a moment where we sort of fit in the ecology of the public sector. So we're grounded in place, committed to supporting whānau-led innovation in place for wellbeing, but we're also fortunate to be working across system to build the learning capabilities for systems change. So we're committed to better outcomes for whānau through system change approaches that privilege mātauranga Māori, that emphasise the importance of learning into different ways of knowing, being and doing for systems change, and to acknowledge the place and the importance of Te Tiriti in Aotearoa and the role of Te Tiriti-led practice for equitable incomes. Sorry, Penny, you can go to the next one. So this is where we kind of sit in the ecology of the public sector, local and central government. It's a really privileged place to be. So we're nested inside of the Southern Initiative, inside of Auckland Council, but we're fortunate enough to be supported by multiple central government agencies and to be working alongside multiple teams across the central government system, helping them to learn into innovation, systems change and Te Tiriti-led practice. And so that brings us to the intent of today and our desire to create the brave and courageous spaces for us to talk about what will it take for us to journey towards a Te Tiriti-centred and mātauranga-led Aotearoa. And we've sent out the pack so you have some context of the conversation that we'll have today. But today really is about starting a conversation or creating a space where we can have an ongoing conversation about the challenges of this work, and to hear from some amazing practitioners, and for those practitioners to share their deep knowledge, their experiences. So I'm just going to land us into the rhythm of the session, and we're going to try and do it in a slightly different way. We're going to try and use Hautu Waka as a way of describing what the journey of this morning will be rather than what the agenda is, but I do have an agenda so you can have a little look at the important things like where the breaks are. If we think about Hautūwaka, it's an incredible Indigenous navigation system which our tūpuna have used to explore the expanse of the unknown. And we've been drawing on this amazing knowledge system to navigate and learn in the complexity of system, and to innovate for change. And I'm going to use this system to kind of think about how the rhythm of the session will happen this morning. Now, Roimata Tani Whapao will take us through a little bit more of a deep dive, or she'd call it a pipi dive, this morning in a moment about Hautūwaka. So don't worry, you'll get to learn a little bit more about this. But what we use it to do, and what I'd like us to think about using it for this morning, is to feel the rhythm of the way that we're connecting, and the way that we're learning, and the way that we're being together in the session today. So we're gathering at the moment, and we're getting ready to deep dive into some really exciting kōrero, and we're getting ready to explore the unknown in terms of understand what's possible and what the potential is for a Te Tiriti centred and mātauranga-led Aotearoa. And for most of us, we're still navigating and circling to understand what that means. But today's session, we're hoping we can do that deep dive into the potential, and we might be able to move into te kitunga and be able to cite some new signs, and maybe even use those new signs in our own work when we return to our roles. And we're hoping we can surface some of these new tohu through hearing the deep experience and kōrero that our speakers will share shortly or later on in the session. So really, what we're trying to create is a space for people together to recognise that we're in a space of potential. Some say unknown, we like to say potential, but to listen deeply and to attune to the kōrero of our speakers today, and identify some ways from the sharing that occurs, some ways, some signs that may help us in our journey towards Te Tiriti-led practice. So once we do the deep dive and we do the listening and we reflect on that, and we may identify some signs for ourselves, some tohu, then we'll come together at the end and we'll celebrate the space that we've created together and the learning that's been shared. So that's the kind of journey. It's recognising we're all here because we want to develop a practice that is largely evolving, and we will do that in relationship together in a learning journey, and moving through the unknown together. It must be so I do have a slide with the session. We've got 3 sort of sections to the sessions. Here's a quick look at it. We're going to move to Roimata in a moment and to hear about Hautūwaka, and you'll get a chance to reflect on that. And then after a break, we're going to hear from some amazing pioneers of Te Tiriti-led practice in the government sector, and you'll get a chance to reflect on that kōrero. And then the last session is really us being able to hear from some keynote listeners and their whakaaro on some of the key points of practice or key learnings that they're hearing through the speaker kōrero, but also we'll then move to a panel kōrero, and then we'll celebrate our space today. So we've got a break at 10:25 and a break at 11:25 e te whānau for a stretch and for you to have a little comfort stop. So Penny, can you go to the next slide? When we're thinking about creating these spaces and these interactions, they're helping us to progress towards Te Tiriti-centric and mātauranga-led Aotearoa. It really requires a brave and safe space where we can be honest and have difficult conversations. And that's because being able to have these conversations often challenges the ideologies that underpin our systems, and they often challenge our own personal attitudes, mindsets, and beliefs. So what we've tried to do here is we've tried to draw on Te Tiriti as a way of understanding what are the principles or the whakaaro that we need to hold as we're having these brave and honest conversations that might be quite uncomfortable and they might be triggering. So just in view of that, what we'd like the whānau to hold is through this conversation in the space in considering Te Tiriti is that the preservation of rangatiratanga and the protection of Māori from harm is a responsibility, and it's a system responsibility, and therefore it's a responsibility of those people who are in the governing system and working in the governing system. It's not a nice to have, it's a constitutional right. And in that right, we really have to think consciously about how we're creating the space and the conditions for tangata whenua to exercise their rangatiratanga. It's not enough to acknowledge the right. We need to be actively creating the conditions and enabling the spaces for tangata whenua to exercise that right. I also encourage you to think about mana orite equity can be achieved if we have system responses that preserve rangatiratanga and protect Māori from harm as the intent of the Te Tiriti holds. And based on that, we understand that these conversations, they are often uncomfortable, they can be triggering. So in terms of supporting the wairuatanga in this space, we have Penny, who will hold a kaimanaki role. Next, if you can go to the next slide, Penny. So if you have any issues or if there's any concerns, here she is, in case you missed her in the first slide. There's Penny. Please message Penny directly through the chat if you've got any concerns. We'd love to hear them, and please message Baruch or Lee if you have any tech issues. So what I'd like to invite you to do now is we're going to put some provocations up for you. These provocations are an invitation to attune to the kaupapa. And there's lots of them, but don't worry. What we just want you to do is we want you to take a minute to read the provocations and to connect to the complexities and the depth of Te Tiriti-led practice. So we're going to give you a moment to read these provocations and reflect quietly. And you might want to make some notes, but it's just a reflection time. So I want to stop talking now, and please feel free to read the provocations and do some reflecting. Ka pai te whānau. As the tuakana Donna says, and wait, it gets better. I'm going to introduce Roimata Tani Whapao. A mihi ana ki te maunga pirongia e hoa. Roimata is going to take us through a session where we're going to learn more about Hautu Waka, and then we're going to do some activities that will help you apply Hautu Waka in your journey. Kei a koe te rākau, Roimata?
Tēnā koe te tahina Angie. Tēnā hoki koutou, kore rau mai, ki raro I tēnei kaupapa o te rā nei. Ai he tika tā te kōrero a Angie, he uri tēnei no tainui waka, no pirongia maunga, no Ngāti Mania poto, no Ngāti Apakura anō hoki. Kei mani rewa au e noho ana I nei, I te puake au ki Otara. My name is Roimata. Thank you, Angie, for that intro. Pirongia Maunga is where it's at. Where is that? That's in the King Country, in the Waikato, but currently living in Taumata. It's my privilege to be able to, if you haven't already seen Hautu Waka, to give you a brief overview of what Hautu Waka is. Shall we can start the sharing now? So, Hautu Waka. Hautu Waka, I'll tell you what it's not. It's not a thing that we've plucked out of thin air. It's a piece of thinking, practice, and methodology that has been around for a long time, since our tupuna came over on the journey from Hawaii ki nui, Hawaii ki roa. And we see remnants of this type of thinking inside of old karakia. So we think of karakia like te kunenga, te pupuke, which was recited by kohuroa. And then we think of a karakia that is taught to us, recited to us by papaririata, ko te ara hau tēnei, kia toka te manawa o te rangi e tūnei. And we often see remnants of pieces of Hautu Waka inside of the Genesis story. Now, I'll take you through the phases, but before we get into that, you may have heard Angie talk about pipidai, and that's exactly what this is. There are 3 levels to Hautu Waka, and the piece that we're going to share with you now, and actually the piece that is readily available across the sector and to anybody that wants it, is the Pipi Dive. So the Pipi Dive involves what does the phases look like and how might we use these phases as a practice methodology and mindset to guide us through complexity, which is what makes this piece of mahi quite special, because it's hard to find an Indigenous piece of mahi that helps you guide your way through complexity, and 2, can be used in many different facets. There is a piece of writing, I can't remember who it is, it'll probably come to me at the end, where we think about Hautu Waka not being just a 2D piece, but rather a spherical. It makes you think 3D or spherically. This is not a lineal. The phases are not lineal in makeup. You must go back and forth. Should we carry on? Let's start, eh? So the first phase that usually comes up, especially when we think about, if we tie it back to what we're doing today around Tiriti-centric practice, is Tiriti-led. And Tiriti-led is a space where we're preparing the waka. Now, inside this phase, this is where we ask the questions around what are the conditions and what are the relationships like in the system? What has prepared us for the mahi? And what did we recognize as current system conditions and capabilities to enable this piece or this next journey to happen? And what skill sets do we identify that we need on side of our journey? So Tiriti-led is just about preparing their waka, preparing the crew, selecting your crew, resourcing your waka, deciding what you have on and what you leave behind. I forgot a really crucial element. You can keep going just so that they can read the next one. But I forgot a really crucial element about the makeup of Hautu Waka, and that being, we started this mahi a few years ago, and it was aligned with Papa Ririata, who came to us and was like, hey, we need to write this thing. At the time, I wasn't very interested because my head was in other places, until he sat us down and he's like, hey, this is, you know, this, we just need to write it up so that whānau can use it. Here we go, this is it. Should we go to the next phase, please? All right, te rapunga. So once you've taken off on your journey, you've decided, all right, we want to go to somewhere. You want to go to Rarotonga, which would be nice. But you're thinking of what your end goal is. Now you've prepared your waka, then you take off. Now te rapunga, the makeup of this phase is actually in the word itself, rapu. So when we think of the word rapu, rapu means to find or to search. And the added word on the end, ngā, makes it an action. So you're not just like looking, you're actually doing something as you're looking. So it's a space where you're venturing into the unknown, into the infinite potential. Now this graphic doesn't adequately depict, and I should tell you that there's new graphics coming out, but when we think of a new journey, we liken it, and Papa likens it to te korokoro o te parata. That's the swirling at the sea. No idea where in the world we're going. We just know that we're on a journey, know where we want to get to, don't know how in the world we're going to get there, but we're on the journey, right? So it's not a space of doing nothing. You're still working and you're still doing stuff whilst you're in te rapunga. So here we are looking for tohu, and that's the whole premise of Hautu Waka, and actually it's the whole premise of helping us move forward, is we're looking for tohu, and those tohu are signposts and they're markers that help us get toward te rawinga, a endpoint, and help us in our journey. So here we're asking, in this phase we usually ask around what supports us to spot the tohu, like what is the mindsets, what are the people that we have on board that can see these types of tohu, and what are the capabilities, mindsets, and processes that support us in the emerging tohu that could come. Let's go to the next one. Te kitenga. Te kitenga, again, is in the name. Kite, look. Ngā is the active doing of looking. So here we are looking, we're searching, we're rummaging through our knowledge systems to look for tohu that are in the environment. And particularly, we're not actually doing anything at this time, like physically, we're just looking. So we're noticing everything. And the whole premise of Hautu Waka as a whole actually is acknowledging that I have a skill set and a mindset, and that allows me to see the world in a certain way. Now my mate, who's on the other side of the waka, they've got a completely different mindset. So they will be seeing different tohu to what I'm seeing. That's why there's two perspectives. And it's getting you to not only think about your own knowledge systems, but to take on the knowledge systems of others. So here we ask the question, what is the landscape that we are venturing into, and what is the context? But also citing the tohu and saying, well, what are the opportunities inside of those tohu? Now here we start to think about, like, what are we seeing that can lead toward compelling alternatives? What are tohu that can lead us toward different status quo? Can we go to the next one, please? Here we have te whāinga. Te whāinga is a space, that's why there's three different circles in there. Now inside of those circles are three tohu that we've decided to follow. So inside of te kitenga, we've acknowledged, right, there's some wind that can lead us toward a something. There is also manu, that are tohu that can lead us toward a something, but then also the current is going a certain way. So we can take those three, we can think about those three tohu and just wonder, if we were to follow those tohu, where would they take us? So here we ask, what is the nature of these compelling alternatives that these tohu can lead us towards? And what do these tohu enable? But what system shifts can these tohu support? But we also start thinking about what are the tangible mechanisms and actions that we might take inside of these tohu to get us to the next space. So carry on, please. Te whiwhinga. So te whāinga, we're thinking, we're having a look, we're having a little bit of a deeper dive. We haven't quite done anything yet. Sometimes we would like test the waters, but te whiwhinga is where we do that. Now this phase is easier to think about if you were, we watch those ocean movies where people are on the water and they see a land far off, and in the distance, the land is there and it's just misted over. But in order to get to that land, there's still quite a lot of moana and water to traverse. And so there could be hidden tohu or hidden mahi in there. That's what te whāinga is. You can see where you're going, but there's still a heck of a lot of work that still needs to happen before you get there. Now, te whiwhinga can also be likened to that of a baby. The baby grasping for toys, grasping for something. They're grasping for it, but they can't quite get it. That's us at this time. Here we're thinking about what are the measurable outcomes that we're seeing and what systems shifts can they support, and what are we seeing as is needed in capacities inside of the systems change. What are the intricate things that we need in order to get to that space? What are we noticing about what's needed inside of those system conditions? And what are we noticing is needed in the capability that we have inside of that systems change? So we've done a lot of work, we've thought, we've seen tohu, we've decided to have a little bit of a dabble, but here in te whiwhinga is usually the time where you're like, oh, well, that tohu didn't lead us anywhere, and you're back in te rapunga. Is that a bad thing? No. Why is that not a bad thing? Because you're actually grabbing tohu all the way, the whole time. As you're tohu grabbing, you're tohu sighting, you're tohu collating, you're doing a little bit of dabbling, you're figuring out that works, that doesn't, we need this systems change, we need these conditions to happen. Okay. And so you're gathering all of those valuable learnings and you're taking them into the next phase. Can you change, please? Into te rawinga. Te rawinga is a space of pumahara, a space to collect, to reflect, and acknowledge the tohu. Now, rawe is a word that I used to say to my kids. This is when they used to listen, because they're all almost teenagers, or they are teenagers going into adults. I used to say to them, ka rawe e tama. I don't say that to them anymore because I hardly listen, but rawe means well done. You're actually saying to the tamaiti, well done, tama. So rawinga is the act of doing great things, or a thing. So here we liken this space to me as the journeyer, as the navigator. Well, I wouldn't be the navigator, I'd be the one that's kaihoe. But as the journeyer, I've created and gathered all of these learnings, and these learnings have meant that we have gotten to a space, we have gotten to a rawinga, a end goal. Was it the goal that we were going for? It might be, or it might not, but I've still gathered all of these learnings, and it's a space that I can share my learnings to you. And I say, here are my learnings in navigating complexity inside of leadership, or here are my learnings in navigating Tiriti-centric practice inside of my chosen field. And then you can take those learnings and go on your next journey, and then you carry on, and then you share. Now, next one, please. So, like I said before at the beginning, Hautūwaka is not linear at all. If anything, it's spherical, because it does cause you to go back, forth, and if we were honest, there would be journeys that are all over the place on this map. But for the next minute, given that we've taken you through a little bit of a journey, so Tiriti-led is preparing your waka, venturing into the unknown, then tohu sighting and having a look at what is out there in the environment, then digging deeper into te whāinga, like researching and exploring the tohu, then te whāinga, or te whiwhinga, around just getting a little bit closer to the end goal, and then te rawinga, actually getting there. What we want you to do for the next minute is have a think about where you orient yourself inside of this Hotu Waka journey. And by that we mean, where might you place yourself in this journey of Tiriti-centric practice? So I'll give you about a minute. I'm not going to give you a minute, I'll give you a few seconds, maybe like 40 seconds to think about that. Okay.
Kia ora, Roimata.
I see it.
Thank you so much. Yes, we're going to move into the breakout when you're ready, Roimata, because the maunga hikerangi spoke too long. So aroha mai. So we'll go to your wonderful questions in the breakout group. Kia ora.
Okay, so that was my minute, which is probably like 40 seconds. But keep that way, we're adaptable. We know how to work complexity, we're fine. So the questions that we want you to think about are, we're going to put you into breakout room soon, but there are 2 questions which will be put into the chat pretty soon. The first question is, we want you to introduce yourself to those people inside of your breakout room. So you would say, ko waio, which means who am I? And where did you place yourself on the Hotu Waka journey? And then give a little bit of a kōrero as to why.
I just want to let you know that we've got some resources on our website where Roimata's explained Hotu Waka, and we've got some other resources that can help you understand Hotu Waka as a methodology. We're still learning about it too, so don't worry if you feel like you weren't able to write down everything you needed.
Mine will be echoing.
Oh, I can hear someone's not on mute. So I want you guys to join in thanking Roimata with me, and we're going to do it. The tuakana Donna taught us how to paki in sign language. So you put your hands up and you give them a little wave like that. So everyone give Roimata a little paki for her kōrero. Thanks, Roimata. And what we're going to do now is go to a break, and during the break we're going to show you the amazing artwork of Dylan Culhane, who is our live illustrator. You'll be able to see what he's capturing as we're on this journey, on this kōrero. So have a break now, team, have a stretch, try to be back by 10:30. I know it's a short break. Have a quick stretch and a quick drink, and we'll see you back at 10:30. Kia ora. Hope you got to have a little break there. We're going to move to our speakers in a moment, but I just wanted to let you know, e te whānau, that we are still learning and drawing from Hotu Waka as an Indigenous methodology ourselves. So don't feel overwhelmed or that you need to absorb it in the session that we're showing you today. We're still learning from it as an Indigenous methodology that's helping us to learn in complexity and to innovate in complexity. It's an ongoing journey for us, but we feel it's really valuable in the way that it centers relationships, attuning, and the way that we work together to do things differently. We've got some resources available on our website, so don't feel rushed to be taking notes in terms of Hotu Waka, and we have other resources on our website that you can refer to that connect to some of this subject content. But it's my pleasure to introduce the speakers now. I'll get Penny to just flick up the slide with our 4 amazing speakers. So you would have seen from your pre-pack there were some bios. These guys are pioneers of Te Tiriti-led practice in the government sector. So I don't really have to introduce them, but I want to. I really want to whakanui these amazing leaders as they forge a way forward for us towards Te Tiriti-led practice as a government sector and as a nation, really. And today we get to immerse ourselves in the deep practices and journeys of these system disruptors who are indigenising spaces in government for better outcomes for whānau. And we're going to get to hear about the enabling conditions, the emerging models and practices, and some of the tensions and dynamics that we need to consider in this mahi. So it's my privilege to introduce Te Mirirangi, who's tū wharetoa in Te Aroa, ngā mihi kia koe o hoa, and to introduce Justine Pivac-Solomon, who has Croatian and Irish whakapapa, and they are leading the strategic investment team in ACC, operationalising wakahaurua as an Indigenous model for Te Tiriti practice. It's amazing work. I'm sure you'll be just as inspired as I am when you hear them talk about the work today. So, kei a kōrua te rākau.
Ngā mihi
Tēnā koe, Angie. Kamatu, tēnā koe katoa.
Ata Māori koutou. Well, thank you so much for the introduction and the warm-up this morning. No Havatska ko tipuna e tipaki au ki pōne ke ko Justine Pivac-Solomon tōku ingoa. Timidi and I are going to share some of our journey towards Mātauranga. We're going to work through a series of slides to tell you a bit about our story. We could have gone really, really wide and told you a whole bunch of things, but we're going to focus on these particular things today. So, Timidi, do you want to intro anything else before I jump in?
Tukua.
Okay, sweet. All right, so what you can see on the slide in front of you is a visual of Mātauranga with our vision towards a safe, inclusive 2040. So starting in 2020, we started to build an evidence-based approach, a theory of change to build safe and supportive environments. We took 2040 as a horizon, and we were really focused on the 200 years since the signing of Te Tiriti. What difference could we make? We started working on a wakahaurua approach to give practical effect to Te Tiriti, and Timidi's going to talk about that a little bit in the next slide. But what we're going to share with you over this presentation is some of the conditions and challenges along the journey of establishing a Te Tiriti-led primary prevention system, and the things that have dragged us or held us back, and the things that have pushed us forward along this journey. And we're going to do a little bit about where we are today. So across this series of slides, we're going to share some of the key challenges and the complexities that we've faced, but alongside the conditions that have really helped us as we put our theory into practice. So from the get-go, the conditions that enabled us to even start and get to the starting block was there was strategic mandate from the organisation to look at working in different ways. So for ACC, we carry the cost of injuries, and costs are increasing. We know that the ways we have been doing prevention of injuries hasn't been working, and that we had to do something different. And so the conditions were right for us to explore those possibilities and how we might design and support injury prevention initiatives. So a condition for this was also organisational change. There was a restructure in 2018 which created our roles. So Timidi is the Cultural Capability Manager, and I'm the Manager of Strategic Investment. The portfolio that we are leading has a purpose to create change and invest in long-term sustainable societal change in behaviours and environments that lead to injury. And there was a real push at the time to focus on the root causes of harm and across the life course, which was a significant change from injury-focused programs. So what seemed really obvious to us, obviously, is colonisation and intergenerational harm, rather than with it as the root cause, rather than a simplistic just before the injury occurs. A condition that supports us is the legislative mandate. While we might not have fully activated it, our legislation is really permissive to look at prevention across the whole system, but also work in a broad way that creates environments that support change strengthens community action, and work in partnership with other agencies so that we can actually do a broad range of activities. We felt there was a real movement inside ACC towards Māori solutions. There was a ministerial drive. We've got strong Māori advocates and voices, both inside ACC, but also outside, encouraging us and pushing us forward on this. And there was foundational work before us. So we were following on from others who had put extensive amount of work and effort. For example, the Whai Te Tika strategy and the Māori Health Solutions work. And I'd just give a shout out to our leadership at the time who really supported us with giving us a blank slate and weathered the storm and the pressure when it was taking us a little bit longer to get this underway so we could really understand what we were doing. And without that leadership, we wouldn't have had the space to create the new framework or to think differently when we're in a really fast-paced organisation. The last condition that has really helped us on this journey is the unique skills and experiences Tiriti and I have. And I want to shout out to my mate who's sharing with me today. Awesome, amazing brain. And I learn so much off for him every day. And the relationship between us to lead this has been challenging at times, but we found a way to negotiate across this. And I really appreciate his commitment to and skills in this space. In terms of challenges to even get to the starting block, we started developing this in 2020 at the beginning of COVID. So much like everyone else at this time, there was a lot of pressure to do a whole bunch of responsive support for whānau, which we did as well as trying to think about a more long-term intergenerational approach. Transitioning from old ways, the organisations, crowd entities always want certainty about what you're doing and why, and we couldn't necessarily provide that. We were just following our intuition, our experience, and trying to support each other in the partnership around that. Moving from a deficit focus to strengths-based is an amazing opportunity when you invest in two worldviews with distinct approaches to address the same challenge. And while that in itself was new, as we moved away from the targeted specific injury prevention work, it was really hard to measure. It is really hard to measure. So we had to think differently about how we will work in a strengths-based way and measure success. And the last point before I hand to Tiriti, a real challenge has been reconciling the dual approach. So we recognise Tangata Whenua and Tangata Tiriti don't do things the same, but we also don't have to. So we need to find the space to negotiate where it makes sense to work together, where it makes sense to be in our own hui, and try and form a coherent shared direction forward with our mutual reciprocity. So I'm going to hand to Tiriti now to talk about our wakahaurua journey.
Kia ora, Justine. So part of the basis of Māori and the theory of change was developing a wakahaurua model, and the teaching or the challenge that created the opportunity for that was going through the theory of change process and feeling like trying to fit te ao Māori, mātauranga Māori, tikanga kawa into that approach. And I think that was really challenging. And so with the support of Justine and our leadership, we created a unique pathway for Māori to determine our own future and aspiration, our own theory of change. At the time, we didn't know whether the two approaches would come together, but we knew that we needed to create the space for Māori to do, explore what those aspirations are and how we might achieve them. We drew on conceptual frameworks from other pieces of work to help us locate a Māori perspective and a Tangata Tiriti perspective into the mahi. So we drew on Heawa Whiria, Angus McFarlane's work, mātauranga, which is another approach to applying Western science and mātauranga Māori into marine conservation, and trying to make that fit for purpose in our ACC injury prevention context. So that meant that we quickly learned that a wakahaurua framing that acknowledged and accepted the worldviews of Tangata Whenua and Tangata Tiriti was a way that we could give practical effect to Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi and Aotearoa. And so it does that by holding space for those different worldviews, the values, the practices, the methodologies of each tangata whenua and tangata tiriti. Once we had built the theory of change, we had a dual outcomes framework with different approaches to achieving those outcomes. Then it was really putting it into action. So in 2021, we developed a business case to prevent sexual violence in Aotearoa. The approved business case meant that we had dual outcomes. We had one investment plan taking dual methodologies, so taking a kaupapa Māori, mātauranga Māori-led approach, and then also a Tangata Tiriti approach to preventing sexual violence in Aotearoa. We built a team, so recruiting the skills and capabilities we thought at the time were necessary to do the mahi. And then over, since that time, we've been really putting into practice, like what does it take to actually do this work? So the gist of the model is that the waka haurua, each hung represents the worldviews, the knowledge and the values of tangata whenua and tangata tiriti. The papanoho, the shared space in between, is what connects those two perspectives together in a space of mutual respect, of reciprocity and balance. And we make, Justine mentioned earlier about negotiations and conversations about making shared decisions on areas of mutual interest. The sales of our waka, they're the different tools or methodologies or approaches that are drawn from the perspectives. And over time, we're adding more things to the waka, and it's growing and growing. But that's the gist of that model. Back to you, Justine.
Thank you. Right. Okay, what you can see on your slide here on the left-hand side is our Te Tiriti-led prevention model, aligning to our legislation. But what we knew that it initially with our primary prevention model was that it didn't have Te Tiriti built through it. So we've taken the time and the energy to build that, and like Tiriti said, to go up to the board. With the a comprehensive theory of change with a strong evidence base aligned to our legislative mandate, and then approval for money, we were like, this is awesome, we're going to start and it's going to be cool. But what we learned very quickly was that was just all theory, and the test has really been putting it into action. So on the right hand side there about the learning approach, we recognized quite quickly actually we needed to think about we're stepping out into the big wide world, and what can we learn about that. I think here, so I'd like to make a shout out to the ACC board and the executive who supported us to get this far and have held us and supported us while we're taking longer to do this, because we're learning about the systems approach. At the time we went to the board, the chair was really supportive and said, this is Te Tiriti-led, you know, make sure you put that integrity to it. And I've really felt that real genuine desire to do better. There's also been winds of change with Te Aorere Kura under Te Puna Aonui and the Child and Youth Wellbeing Strategy with DPMC. There's a lot of cross-government work that is helping move us forward to have a shared approach in this way. And we sit, I think, primary prevention in the nexus between those two strategies, and our investment is a platform to prototype and test it. Along the learning journey, we've also got robust measurement systems in ACC about a return on investment approach. And by learning, we are looking at how we do it differently. I'd like to also shout out to our TSI partners who are helping us learn along this way, and it's been invaluable support. So thank you to all of you. Ultimately, what we've learned in this last year and a half, nearly 2 years, is ultimately this is a fundamental change to the way that we work. Initially, we thought we'd put the money out there and go, great, here we are, Te Tiriti-led investment. But it's not that at all. And even creating specific Māori roles or sharing resources across the waka haurua isn't sufficient. We can't carry on doing the same things we've always done. It's a really good start, and we'd like to do more of that. But it's something that we all have to engage in, and it's a huge capability build to work in this way. So we need to take the learning approach. We're asking our leaders and our decision makers to think differently, to hold us in the unknown. We want them to ask us different questions, to be curious and be open to the challenges that they will also get on this journey. And we've found them super supportive in that. And I'll hand back to Tiriti with a bit more about the learning model.
Quick apologies about the slides. Hopefully that's a little bit better. The next slide here is, as we've been implementing the mahi, the theory has been one thing, but there was a really significant shift from thinking about great ideas to actually putting them into practice. And we quickly learned that activating Māori in the prevention system is a learning process that requires new capabilities and ways of working, particularly for not just for the people, but for the system and the organisation in which we work in. So embedding a learning approach is a way to enable systems shift, to work in complexity and build the evidence base for primary prevention. A systems approach was really important. What you're looking at here is a summarized version of our learning model, which is really based on, I guess, the Southern Initiative, the CoLab's Niho Taniwha model. So I really want to mihi to the team who've helped support the team in developing this mahi. Tuatahi ko te kawa. First, it's the underpinning values and principles for us being in relationship together. What are the core values that are important to us to be able to do this mahi? Second, the capabilities. What are the skills, capabilities that we require to be able to implement and operationalize Māori? And if we're taking a mātauranga-led approach, what types of skill sets do our kaimahi require to be able to do that, both as tangata whenua and as tangata tiriti? Third, working together is what are the mechanisms that we put in place for our teams to be able to connect, to reflect, to share, to learn. We talk about the papanoho as a space of sharing the insights from our different perspectives and landing together on making a common narrative about the work that we're doing. And sometimes they're different, and that's okay. The model isn't about always trying to make things fit together. It gives the space for differences of opinions and approaches to coexist. And what's important is that we create the platforms for that kōrero to take place. And then fourth is ngā tohu. What are the signs, the indicators that we're looking for that give us confidence that the wakahaurua practice is being activated and is being embedded in our work? And so that might look like at an individual level, their own awareness of their own practice. It might feel like they're managing the expectations of the mahi really well. And then in a hiwi or in a whole perspective, our tangata whenua rōpū, there are learnings and insights, I suppose, that we will be looking for to ensure that mātauranga Māori is being respected, that kaupapa Māori practices are being enabled, and similarly for our tangata tiriti whole as well. And then altogether, what are those things that show that as a collective whole that this piece of work is working really well? This is really new for our team. We're still getting into the rhythm and the flow of trying to understand this, and at the moment really dialing into, well, what does wakahaurua practice mean for us? What are the things that are really important to us? But I think what is, I wanted to note as well on this slide is that it is really challenging. It means that we're breaking the norm in a lot of our mahi, which means you're constantly having to question what you're doing and challenging the status quo. And that creates a lot of cognitive load, a lot of energy that's expended on doing the day-to-day mahi. But that's what's required to ensure that we're shifting the system and the ways of working to make a difference in our mahi. So the learning model is really important for recognising that the destination in which we're going to, we may not know what the answers are, and we need skills and processes and ways of working to be able to learn through the tension and the challenges. Back to you, Justine.
Right, so our insights here. Now, we could have chosen many things to talk about, but in a 20-minute presentation and with only a few slides, what we've chosen here is a couple of key points. The wakahaurua creates a different way of working. What's probably key is it changes not only what we're doing, but how we're doing it. We thought we might be investing outside of ACC and putting the money out there, and that would make the change. But what we realize is, as Timothy said, we're investing in ourselves and changing the way we work. This can be really challenging for us as tauiwi because we've never had to question our own practices. We dominate in our pervasive ways of doing, make it really hard to think, actually, what do we want to do? And we have to understand where we fit and be really intentional about it. And we also try not to burden our tangata whenua colleagues, but it's a real challenge too. Timothy's talked about the papanoho and respecting the views of the others, and it takes time and it evolves. And then probably the last key point here with number 3 is, like I said, about investing in ourselves. We're in a Crown agency. There's a whole bunch of ways of working and entrenched ways of operating, government rules of sourcing, legal requirements, risk questions. While people are super supportive and genuinely want us to succeed, our team is navigating around that every day, and it has been really challenging. What we do feel though is the future is really optimistic. Our organisation is supportive, and we have the space to learn as we go.
Right, so what's next? Continuing to do the mahi and refine and deepen our understanding of the practices, the capabilities and the skills required. This relies on us working with our teams and building the practice evidence for what good looks like, and that we're being able to implement the wakahaurua approach. It also means that we're also interested in, what difference does this type of approach and way of working mean for our whānau? What evidence of change is it making? Increased investment, transformative change for whānau communities, and also across the system and across the public sector. And then lastly, what we're already recognising is we've been applying this approach for a number of years, and it is having a broader influence across ACC, and we're seeing similar approaches being taken up across the public sector. And so the question, or the opportunity, I suppose, for what this means for ACC and taking a broader approach to applying wakahaurua framing and systems approaches to our mahi is really exciting.
So the very last slide, which I don't expect you all to read at this point, but if you look at the slides later, you'll see it's a quote from the Waitangi Tribunal called Aotearoa TNA report. And in summary for us is that we know the last 180 years haven't worked for any of us in the ways that we've been doing our work. We need to change, and we've got nothing to lose. So we feel Te Tiriti gives us that guidance and vision, as they say in this quote, as a way to move forward. And the wakahaurua has given us the metaphor to bring Te Tiriti life in the Crown agency. So we're absolutely optimistic, like this quote says. So thank you.
Kia ora koutou.
Oh, he mahi nui kia korua, Justine, korua ko Timothy. I'll get everybody to give you fellas a paki. That's blinking, inspiring mahi, isn't it? Or send a heart to these fellas. Like I say, we've been really lucky to work alongside the strategic investment team, and I can hand on heart say this is some of the most cutting. Oh, he mahi nui kia korua, Justine, korua ko Timothy. I'll get everybody to give you fellas a paki. That's blinking, inspiring mahi, isn't it? Or send a heart to these fellas. Like I say, we've been really lucky to work alongside the strategic investment team, and I can hand on heart say this is some of the most cutting edge Te Tiriti-led practice in Aotearoa. I just also want to draw a connection to the considerations when we were looking at Te Tiriti at the start in the context setting. This team is building a wakahaurua model and practice that supports Indigenous Te Tiriti-led practice inside a Crown agency, as well as delivering innovative programs that focus on wellbeing for whānau at the same time. They are delivering multiple levels and breadths practice and innovation, so a big mahi to them. And what I hear and what really what I feel in my heart is that they are they're taking the intent that we've talked about for so long, and they're putting that stuff into operation. And the way that they're doing it is they are being very intentional about understanding what the practices are that enable the conditions and the spaces for rangatiratanga to be exercised inside the system for for wellbeing. So thank you very much, Kōrua. What we're going to get you to do now, e te whānau, is that was just such rich kōrero, wasn't it? And we're going to get you to reflect on that kōrero using 2 pātai. So hopefully someone's going to throw our pātai up so you can see them. And our pātai are, what whakaaro does this raise for you, this kōrero? And what tohu or what tohu indicators are emerging as important in this work? And we're going to get you to reflect on those questions for a little while and do some reflecting yourself on those questions. And we're going to invite you to throw any pātai or whakaaro into the chat. I know you don't have to be invited to do so, e te whara. I can see them coming up on the chat. We're going to scoop up those pātai and those whakaaro for the panel session at the end of this this hui taumata. We won't have time for all of the pātai, but we'll try our best to identify some of the key themes. Ka pai. E te whānau, we're going to move to our next 2 amazing speakers today. We're really, really lucky to have Tania Faulkner, who leads out the mahi for Māori outcomes for IRD, and also Dr. Debbie Goodwin to kōrero about this incredible work that they've been doing, which holds whānau voice at the heart of how IRD can think about how they support Māori aspirations and outcomes for whānau. So it's such a privilege to have you both online with us today. Tania and Debs. Tania's Ngāti Awa, Ngāti Rangi Nui a Ngāpuhi, Ngā mihi ki a koe e hoa. And Debs is Ngā Tūhoi Whakatohia and has Pākehā Whakapapa as well. Lovely to see you, Deb. Kei a kōrua te rākau.
Kia ora, Ange. E ngā mana, i ngā reo, e ngā haue whātena koutou. Ko tūhoi ko whakatohia ko Ngāti Pākehā oku iwi. E te puake a haui tane atua, engari ka kirikiri roa e noho ana e nai nei. Ko Debbie Goodwin tōku ingoa. He kai aro matawai a hau. I'm an independent evaluator, and I've been working with Tania and her colleagues at Te Mātauranga Hau in Inland Revenue for the last year. And I just, before we go into the kōrero, I'm just going to hand it over to Tania to also introduce herself. Kia ora, Tania.
Tēnā koutou e te whānau, tuatahi me mihi ki a koe tōna. Anō e whakatuwhera te tātou hui i te rānei. He mihi anō ki nā kai whakahaere e whakarite tēnei hui whakahirahira. O tira ki a tātou katoa tēnā tātou. Nā te kune te pupuke, nā te pupuke te hihiri, nā te hihiri te mahara, nā te mahara te hine naro, ka hua te wāna nā tihei mauri ora. He uri ahau o mātātua waka, ko Ngāti Awa te iwi, ko Tania Faulkner tōku ingoa, ko au he pūkena mo te taritake, kei te mihi ki a koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone, my name is Tania Faulkner, and I've worked at Inland Revenue coming up 30 years now. So I've been able to work within different kaupapa Māori spaces within the department, and I'm currently a part of a newly formed team called Te Kāhui Tūhono, which seeks to give expression to a Te Tiriti-based approach through our Māori strategy called mātauranga. Kia ora, Debs.
Kia ora anō. So working alongside the Te Mātauranga Hau team, I noticed some ways of working that I thought would be really valuable to share in this forum today, and that's why I asked Tania to come along and have a kōrero with us today. I guess as part of the year that I've been with IR as an independent contractor, I have seen, as someone from the outside in, that Te Tiriti is an important kōrero in Inland Revenue, and the organisation has been on a journey to understand how it can work in ways that are consistent with the spirit of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Some of the significant contributions have been the way that they support these, the mana of Te Tiriti has been in the work of setting up the new team Te Kahui Tūhono, which Tania is now part of. Their organisational strategy called Mahutonga, Mauri Ora Te Whānau, a Māori customer strategy, and Kaitaka Wainga Māori, which you may have heard of, which are the people that are the front-facing within the Māori communities across the motu. They have also recently launched a principles-based approach across the organisation called Te Pau o Te Tangata, which is organisational values of manaakitanga, whanaungatanga and mahi tika. And these have gone right through the organisation as the ways that they will work. And another thing that they've just developed and is currently being launched in the next few months will be their cultural capability uplift approach called Te Arapiki. So you can see there's been a lot of work and a lot of mahi that's been done, particularly in the recent years. And this is giving expression to Te Tiriti, as well as what the work that Tania has been doing. So what I'd like to do is invite Tania, and I'm going to ask Tania some questions to share the work that she's been doing in Tiriti Te Hono, which is a Māori outcomes research mahi. So I'll ask you a few questions, Tania, and we will go from there. So tēnā kōrero mai, Tania, tell us about Tiriti Te Hono, Māori outcomes. What is the Māori outcomes research work that you've been doing, and what was the reason for doing and sharing this within Inland Revenue?
Kia ora, Debs. Well, firstly, the whakatauki that I used in my mihi, it refers to a tribal version of the Māori creation stories. So it encourages us to look to our past for guidance on our future. And likewise, Tiriti Te Hono encourages IR to look at its past outcomes for Māori for guidance on the inclusion of Māori outcomes in IR's future way forward. And that means understanding a Māori worldview of what outcomes are important to Māori. For example, motuhake, reo me ngā tikanga, whakapapa, upholding rights and roles and responsibilities of the whānau, of the marae, holistic and intergenerational well-being, and how whānau Māori express Māori outcomes is oranga tangata, oranga whānau, and oranga whenua. The reason that I did this mahi was originally about Māori data, but as it evolved over time, one of our deputy commissioners, he asked a really critical question, and his question was, well, what outcomes is the data looking to support? And so the kaupapa then changed to understanding Māori outcomes from a whānau Māori view and IR and other government agency view. So the Māori outcomes mahi, it's about bringing the understanding of the two worlds of Te Tiriti partners together. The mahi was done by our Māori research team, and it took about 3 years. And it was an iterative process that was undertaken in 2 phases. So this amazing taonga was gifted to Inland Revenue from whānau Māori Āmotu. Phase 1 was about gaining a deep understanding of Māori outcomes, and this phase is called Tiriti Te Hono. So the name Tiriti Te Hono was gifted to Inland Revenue by an external research participant from Horo Whenua. And in the context of this mahi, Tiriti Te Hono means to bind the connections between Māori and IR to understand better outcomes for Māori. Phase 2 is a Māori outcomes framework, and we call it Hai Hai Whakarei. The name Hai Hai Whakarei, it also came from an external research participant from Waikato Tainui. So we're very humbled and privileged to have received this taonga. Hai Hai is a significant pattern in Māori carving, and one meaning of whakarei is to enhance. So in the context of this mahi, Hai Hai Whakarei is about Inland Revenue carving a deeper understanding of Māori specific outcomes. And what that means is outcomes that whānau Māori aspire to determine for themselves. So because these are not internal outcomes or government driven outcomes, the challenge is how can institutions like Inland Revenue contribute and support towards the outcomes that Māori aspire to achieve? One of the first outputs was these 8 key insights, and they guide Inland Revenue towards better outcomes for Māori. And I'll just speak to a few of them to give you an understanding of what the insights look like. These 8 key insights that I'm referring to, what they look like was outcomes for IR and other government agencies. They're often about measurable type results, and that are considered beneficial and applicable to everyone. Whereas outcomes for Māori, they're broad and multifaceted, and there's no single definition. And whānau Māori often speak about outcomes in a more narrative way. So outcomes for Māori, they're about holistic wellbeing on a continuous and intergenerational journey. And there's 3 main vital concepts that can be anchored within Māori outcomes, and these are oranga tangata, oranga whānau, and oranga whenua. And they speak directly to the intergenerational wellbeing of Māori. A key aspiration for Māori is, as we all know, tino rangatiratanga and mana motuhake. I recall a quote from a rangatira I interviewed who expressed this whakaaro of 2 worldviews in the context of IR and Māori. And what he said was, this is his quote, "There are 2 forms of knowledge in Aotearoa, both are legitimate and validated within their own right. And one view is based on a world-class revenue system of international practice and theory, and the other is based on mātauranga Māori. And that's okay, it's just different ways of thinking." So these are real challenges for Inland Revenue to critically think about and explore how it can support and contribute towards Māori outcomes, and therefore give practical expression that upholds the worldviews of both Tiriti partners in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that honour our responsibility to Te Tiriti. Okay, a koe, Debs.
Kia ora, Tania. We got our slides up, which is great. So as evaluators, we love to talk about outcomes, and especially how we can include, the views of those we're working with and for. In particular, we hold those up as our taumata. So what approach did you take that allowed you to develop this process to maintain integrity of that kōrero?
Ka pai. We can just change slides, please. So the approach is really important, and who you send to speak with whānau Māori is just as important. So the approach we used for this mahi was a strength-based kaupapa Māori approach, which means that it is grounded in kawantikanga Māori, mātauranga Māori, and āhuatanga Māori. So all of these things are brought into the planning and conduct of our mahi and reporting. An example is whanaunatanga approach. So we operate as a whānau, so tuakana teina, teina tuakana. We're always checking in on each other daily and having lots of cup of tea and kōrero, making sure everyone is okay or if they need support. We don't work in isolation of each other, so we're always looking for ways to empower and uplift the kaupapa. Key to success was using an outside-in approach, and that's really important, an outside-in approach. So taking an external Māori view and bringing those perspectives into Inland Revenue in its purest form. So this provides an opportunity to be able to shape the internal processes. An outside-in approach is essentially an Indigenous approach. So it highlights and gives privilege to whānau Māori voices and their experiences. It connects people to their environments and places of importance to them, which is mana motuhake. An example of this is commonly found when a person recites their pepeha and connects themselves to maunga, awa, iwi, etc. And this means that the role of the institution is to figure out how it can support Māori aspirations and not the other way around. So the mahi of the kawanatanga should be to tautoko. An institution's starting point as a public service, it's often different to a Māori starting point. And what whānau Māori told us through the research was that the starting point for Māori outcomes is te ao Māori. that we should look beyond Te Tiriti to Te Ao Māori for the intergenerational well-being of Māori. But Te Tiriti is an important enabler within IR to give practical expression to how it contributes and supports Māori outcomes. The risk of using a Western process, it means that we end up with the same historical outputs that won't work well for Māori. Ko ngā hua Māori te mea nui, ko te tuakana, Māori outcomes is the priority. The challenge for the institutions, one of the challenges for the institutions, is to acknowledge this and put it into action. So it's not okay to simply ignore it or put it in the too hard basket. And there's always people who can help you. So it's important to understand how the systems within institutions operate to be able to navigate and influence change. It's not about retrofitting Māori into an already existing mainstream system. It's about influencing organisational and behavioural change. So essentially what we're doing is deconstructing to a neutral place and then reconstructing in a way that resonates with two worldviews, Māori Crown, so that we can create something new that is more meaningful for Māori communities. Allow yourself time and remember that the journey is just as important, if not more so, than the end result. It takes time, so allow for lots of it, because organisations, they can often operate within a transactional environment rather than in a relational way. So when you're working in a kaupapa Māori way, it's important not to work in isolation of each other. Kei a koe, Debs.
Kia ora. Hearing about how the organisation has that outside an approach, or is starting to take that idea on and bring in the voices and the kōrero whānau is really awesome. What would be really good to talk about is a little bit more about what enables the work to happen within IR itself.
Yeah, so keeping people internally and externally informed and connected is really critical so that they can wrap their skills and expertise around the kaupapa, but to also bring them along on the journey. Like, that's key, bringing everybody along on the journey and don't leave anybody behind. Constant check-in points and socialising the kaupapa with others across all levels of the business, including the commissioner, senior management levels, and back to whānau Māori is vital. Your golden ticket is to have buy-in from your commissioner. You need to have a great story to tell so that the commissioner can see the value add and invest in your kaupapa. Interacting with the right parts of the business as well, that's also important. For us, it was places such as policy, strategy, our performance measurement team, our data experts, operational areas across the business. And this ties back to how your organisation represents its mission and vision statements for Māori. In their revenue, each of these areas that I've just referred to, they're all driven by documents specific to working with whānau Māori. Make clear your why. Is it because of Te Tiriti, which is important, or does it go further to support the well-being of all people within Aotearoa, New Zealand? Be prepared to hear something different. So if you want to hear the voice of whānau Māori and you want to include Māori and have an equal relationship, you need to be prepared for the findings and outputs from Māori, because they will be different to what the organisation may think or be used to. The outputs from whānau Māori, they're gold. And institutions, they can't dispute what wellbeing means for whānau Māori. So it's pono, it's tūturu, it is what it is. And remember that you can stand on the mana of the kōrero from whānau Māori because it's a collective voice from Ngākau Māori. Build your marae and surround yourself with experts and others in your kaupapa, both internal and external, so that they too can become masters of your universe, your navigators of change across the business. Connect them and help them to build on their own relationships, influence and indigenise organisational spaces over time, so that it becomes other people's superpower to navigate that change. If we can just change the slide, please. Sorry, Shen. give practical expression to two worldviews. So create a safe space where staff can share their worldview and help them understand what a Māori perspective looks and feels like in relation to their mahi. And don't be afraid to use your voice as a tool to advocate for Māori wellbeing. We use products that help us to tell our story, like reports and visuals, videos, and tools that we've developed and shared along the way so that people can understand the journey. The products we made, they were also made to support IR people to apply Māori perspectives within their mahi. And so in this example, in this slide, the table illustrates an expression of two worldviews sitting side by side each other. And you can see that there's some clear opportunities to improve. Kei a koe, Debs.
Kia ora Tania. We're just wrapping up our last part of the kōrero. You know, this isn't easy work. We're talking organisational change, people change, culture change, mindset change. What have been some of the challenges that you've come across in embedding the work in IR, and how are you working towards resolving those challenges?
Yeah, so there's many challenges as we've heard in the previous kōrero speakers. But one challenge is bringing te ao Māori views to the tepu. And there's a famous proverb that says, ko te kai a te rangatira he kōrero. And it's such a powerful message for Crown agencies, ko te kai a te rangatira he kōrero. So whānau Māori, they want to see themselves reflected within organisational strategies, policies, and operational services, and in a meaningful and considered way. But I can't express this well enough, is remember the journey is just as important, if not more so, than the end result. It's easy for people to go directly to solutions based rather than understanding what a Māori perspective is, and then going on the journey. So you might have heard the expression of quick wins or low-lying fruit, you know, government language, rather than taking the longer, broader view of building capability over time to fully understand what needs to change in order to make the systems more meaningful for Māori. So it's not just about outputs or results, it's about including that sense of intergenerational and continuous well-being, which means it should ensure future understanding of outcomes. Try to remember your audience, other staff. They may know very little or nothing at all about things Māori, and they may want to know how to do better. So for the masses, they may be pre-101 mātauranga Māori, but as kaitiaki of information, know when it's okay to release knowledge and when to hold on to the knowledge. You can't be like precious though, because you must, you know, share toha, but in a culturally appropriate way and seek advice. Can we just change? Yeah. Help connect the dots for people so they can see the value add. It's about collective strength and opportunity. So be brave and bold, but always pono ki te kaupapa. Another challenge is understanding internally what the organisation is needing and why. So navigating internal processes is key. You have to know what the Pākehā process is before you can apply whakaaro Māori. So to be able to influence change, it's important that you know the systems that you're working within, especially when you're working with kaupapa Māori. It's critical to understand the bigger picture of your organisation's functions and systems and processes and how it operates, because those systems, they come from a Western view, and therefore they don't allow a Māori way of doing things. A Māori worldview, it has mana and it has a distinct place within the organisation, and the acknowledgement of the mana and integrity of two worldviews, it's critical. So it's the starting point of the journey. And when the organisation can acknowledge and allow a Māori viewpoint to have the same mana, the journey towards becoming a better Te Tiriti partner is just that little bit easier. IR staff are requesting more and more assistance to help them understand how to bring Te Ao Māori perspectives into their mahi. And some of the suggestions that we have made are things like considering what IR's vision and mission statements say and how these represent whānau Māori. What are IR's outcomes, and do these reflect Indigenous outcomes like oranga, tangata, whānau and Whenua? So the foundational documents, they really, really matter. Put these in place first to help move the masses. All of this mahi, all these things collectively, they tell a great kōrero, a great story of how we're supporting and contributing towards our Māori Crown relationship, and also how we're giving practical expression to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And just as important is how we're contributing and supporting towards the greater intergenerational well-being of people within Aotearoa, New Zealand. Komitu, kia koe Debs.
Kia ora tānia, tino nui te mahi mea o kōrero I tēnei ata. You've given us heaps and heaps of kōrero whakaaro in your kōrero today, and I'm sure there will be lots of takeaways to be thinking about. So thank you, e te tuakana. Thank you for coming along and sharing, and I'm just going to hand it back to, I think, Angie. Kia ora, Angie.
Oi. Kia ora kōrua. Reka te kōrero ne. Everybody give these two amazing wahine paki in the sign language. We're a little bit over time, so what we'll do is get you to reflect on the questions during the break. But just before we leave this kōrero, I just really wanted to reflect on two key points that Tanya and Debs were talking about. One is that there's a need to give practical expression to two worldviews, and this needs to be a conscious and intentional effort. It's not about recognizing them in theory or in strategy. It's about how you're doing that day to day in the mahi. And the second thing, which I love, is given the failure of the Crown to deliver on the intent of Te Tiriti, really we need to be rethinking what the role of governing systems are now. And I heard Tanya say the role is to tautoko the aspirations of Māori. So that's a good reframe for us i te whānau that are in the system. How is it that we use our influence and our position in these systems to tautoko whānau? So what I'll get you fellas to do is we'll go to a break. We're a little bit over time, and I want you to have a decent break. But what I want you to do over the break, while you have a stretch and a drink, is to think about that amazing kōrero and reflect on what whakaaro this raises for you and what are the tohu that you see are emerging as important. And we'll see you fellas back here at 11:40. Kia ora rā. Kia ora te whānau. Hope you were able to have a stretch and get a drink or something to eat. Let's land back into the session. What amazing kōrero in our previous section, what amazing speakers. What we're going to do now is we're going to get you to reflect on that amazing kōrero, but we're going to get you to reflect on it in groups. So we're going to move you into breakout groups in a moment, but I'll also encourage you to put any pārtai or any comments into the chat. I want you guys to be thinking about as we're going into these breakout groups is what are the tohu that are emerging as important on this journey, and what is helping us or you to navigate forward. So we think about that really rich kōrero that Justine and Timothy and Tanya and Debs gave us. We want you to reflect on what are the tohu that are emerging as important on this journey. So what are the signals? What are the navigation points? What are the sightings in that kōrero that resonate with you and feel important for your practice, but for practice, our collective practice in the public sector? And what is helping you to navigate forward in this journey towards Te Tiriti centered and mātauranga led Aotearoa. So in a moment, we'll be getting ready to pop you into breakout groups, and then we'll have a kōrero together. We'll get an opportunity for you to feedback. And we'll go into the wider session after that. So I've just popped those in the questions into the chat, and I'm assuming that our amazing tech team is getting our breakout rooms ready, and you can pop into the breakout rooms and introduce yourself and kōrero about those 2 questions that I've just given you fellas to think about. Kia ora te whānau, hope you made some more connections and got to have a kōrero using our 2 reflection questions and drawing from the amazing kōrero of our speakers today. What we're going to get you to do now is to capture some of your reflections based on that kōrero and the breakout into Slido. I think that's the plan, team. So in a moment, our tech team's going to throw up a Slido link, and we're going to get you to answer the questions by either clicking on the link in chat, using the QR code that will come up shortly, or going to the website and using the code. And the 2 questions that we are going to ask you to think about and answer using Slido are: where do you feel we are at in our collective journey towards Te Tiriti-led practice as a public sector, and why? And what are 1 or 2 tohu you heard in the kōrero that help us to navigate forward? So in a moment, one of our team will drop the Slido link, and you'll be able to see it here. And you'll be able to see the question. I'll drop them into the chat as well. And what we want you to get you to do is to answer the question. You can either put your phone up and put the camera on the QR code, and it will take you directly to the survey. Or you can click on the link that one of our team is going to drop into chat right now. Or you can go to slido.com and use the code to find the survey. And then we'll get you to answer the questions. So if you're having trouble with any of those options, you can also feel free to answer the questions by using the chat function. Just write into the chat. And as you're answering the questions, we should be able to see what people are putting into the survey.
The Māori, the first navigator of Aotearoa. And we want to apply this education into the minds of the next generation. The Te Māori, ka whakatō te kākano, i rui a mai, i rangi a te a, te taputapu a te a. Whakatō te kākano, i rui a mai, i rangi a te a, te taputapu a te a. Ko te hui.
Oh, yeah, go for it. Come on. Probably, yeah.
It's been a mixture of lectures and breakout groups, and now we're just in a Slido section where everyone's filling in.
Tihei ki te tai au, tihei ki te whai au, ki te au. Huti ake te whenua tapu nei ka whakatau I te rangi, e tu iho nei, whakatau I te papa, e takoto nei. Tomo mai ki taku pātū wata wata, ki taku pare tipuna koe a te ara, ki te kāpuru takapau. Te mana, o mā witiki tiki te potiki a taranga, ko ake taku waka, he waka haurua ti pare taua, whakamaua kia tina. Nuku tae te meha, nuku tere tangatanga, kākahi taka iro iro o te moana, e pō tere nei, ki ngā tai o Tangaroa. Iho nui, I horo, iho matua, taku mana heke tō tika no te atua, mai te atua ki a hau, ki we te hi, ki nge te hi, ki e te hi, ki e tahi rānei, whakamaua kia tina, ki te kato, a kua mene ki te pō uri uri, te pō kere kere, te pō tango tango, te pō kara uri, ti whamai ko te au I te pō. Turuki, paneke, paneke hi. Ko te kakano, I rui a mai, I rangi a te a, tapu tapu a te a. Whakatō te kakano, I rui a mai, I rangi a te a, tapu tapu a te a. Whakatō te kakano, I rui a mai, I rangi a te a, tapu tapu a te a.
Ko ngā te kuri te aupori, kia kotahi mai tātou katoa. Te rarawa ngai takoto, ko ngā tikahu kia kaha mai rā. A whinatia mai e tātou, ngā uri o muri whenua. Ki a whiwhia e ngā tanga nei o ngā tūpuna. Te tiriti o Waitangi, hei piringa mō tātou. Ko te mana motu hake, o te iwi Māori e. Kupuriti a ko te mana, te pono me te aroha. Ki a whiwhia e ngā tanga nei o ngā tūpuna. Te tiriti o Waitangi, hei piringa mō tātou. Ko te mana motu hake, o te iwi Māori e. Kupuriti a ko te mana, te pono me te aroha. Ki a whiwhia e ngā tanga nei o ngā tūpuna. Ki a whiwhia e ngā tanga nei o ngā tūpuna.
Mei ngara tenei, koe ka puta nā kaora. He tā, kei tukua iho,
Ka pai e te whānau. And see some awesome comments in there, and see people are placing themselves in different places along the journey, but with great intention and hope that we can work towards a more Te Tiriti centred and mātauranga led Aotearoa. And I can see some awesome suggestions about what's going to help us to progress. Kaumātua, sharing, deep learning. It sounds like some of you guys need to be hosting the next hui taumata, so I'll look forward to that. Anyway, what we're going to do now, team, is we're going to hear from our keynote listeners who have been listening away in the background and taking notes, and what they're going to do is give us 2 to 3 minutes of their key insights based on the amazing kōrero that they've heard today. So we're going to go to Kimi Tangairi, who is no te pītonga tonga o Hukirangi Hoki. She's from the Coast Taira Whiti and works at the South Auckland Social Wellbeing Board in the Evidence and Insights team with a focus on equity and outcomes for Māori. And hopefully she won't go on and on like the first Hukirangi did and got us behind time. But kei a koe e te rangatira, give us your thoughts about the kōrero you've heard so far. Kia ora.
Oh, tēnā koe, Angie. Tēnā koe ki te whānau katoa. Thank you so much. It's been so great being with everyone this morning. Really inspirational stuff. Just want to share a couple of thoughts just listening to our beautiful kai kōrero. How might we navigate Te Tiriti-led practice? Some of the tohu, some of the things I think are coming through from listening today are, it might be a strip back, and I'm keeping it in the like tīmata space. And there's 3 parts of the tīmata, and how can we be intentional about that? Because often we will keep our mahi going while we try to add in this extra thing. So maybe we're going back to there, and that's again being intentional around our intent right at the start. And I heard this in 3 different ways today from our speakers. The first one was around conception, and Tanya talked about the creation story, and I thought that was so beautiful. Often the mahi that we're doing in ACC referred to this. They were talking about their starting point was injury prevention, but you know, they pushed back and went to the causal stuff and not the symptomatic stuff, and they're talking about decolonizing, they're talking about the big trauma that's sitting there. And then they also pushed right through to the I wouldn't say an end point, but they went through to well-being. So it's what is your starting point? I'm really hearing clearly that's an important aspect of Te Tiriti-led practice. So the conception. The second one was the spaces. And I've got lots of beautiful questions around how this would actually happen in practice, but I'm really hearing clearly that the spaces around what are the conditions to hold our leadership in the space of rapunga, of te rapunga. You know, how do we keep them, I wouldn't say comfortable, but how do we keep them in that space so they can hold that for us while we're doing the mahi? Another space is the noho space, and ACC talked about the 2 rounds and the papa noho in the middle. Like the holding of space seems really, really important for the people, but then also the holding of space for learning. And often in our agencies, we don't hold that space very well. We're kind of into the doing, and we need to tick stuff off, and lots of, you know, constructs create that for us, time frames and pressures, but it's how do we weave that learning and innovation and naturally into the work that we do seems very, very important. So that was the spaces. And then the third part of the tīmata was the people. And ACC talked about, Timothy and Justine talked about, talked about they built the team to do the mahi versus sort of coming in and you already have a team and you're trying to do the mahi. It seems like a different way to approach it, which I think was really important condition to start the work. And then Tanya also talked about building the marae around you. And often I feel like that marae will be outside of your agency, outside of the Crown, and connecting into other people. So I think that's a really important starting point too. So that was what I was hearing as a really important thing. It's the taumata, it's the conception. What's the starting point? And it might not be the starting point that you got right now. What are the spaces and how are you holding those for those different conditions? And then also the people. Maybe it's about understanding the mahi and getting the people around it that can do that work versus going with existing structures and teams. That might be a bit controversial, but it's just a different way to think about it. But ngā mihi, thank you for having me.
Ngā mihi, quite a few. That was awesome. I love the idea of if we want to be knowing, doing differently, then one thing we can do is start differently. So don't start with the way that we've always done things. How can we start differently? And that was a really great prompt on 3 things that we can think about to start differently. Kia ora rā, Kimi. We're going to move to Darcy Dalziel now, who also works at ACC with the strategic investment team with a focus on child and youth wellbeing. Lovely to see you, Darcy. Kei a koe te rākau.
Kia ora, Angie. So I did a yes listening to our 2 presenters, but I was also part of a really awesome breakout group where we were also sharing our reflections on the tohu and what's required to navigate through this work. So building on what we discussed in that group as well. And there's a real sense of yes, the space, the conditions required to do this work, which came through loud and clear through our presenters this morning. And there was lots of love and admiration and respect for our presenters as well. What we talked about was there's a real strength showing through in approaching this complexity through at least 2 worldviews. So giving the space to Te Ao Māori, but also acknowledging Tangata Tiriti is made up of multiple worldviews as well. And someone in my group articulated this beautifully by saying a lens is made up of multiple pieces of glass. So this is really an opportunity to be incredibly inclusive and diverse in our approaches. And starting points are really important in that. There's a real beauty for me and for others as well in articulating concepts and taking the time to do that. So not only the wakahaurua approach, the how to waka as well, but also concepts that are really important in Te Ao Māori, but also concepts that or things that we don't necessarily take the time to articulate in Te Ao Pākehā as well. So I think Tanya had a slide where she was articulating those 2 things, which often speak in opposition to each other sometimes, but often there's some similarities too. So it's that conversation through different worldviews and articulating those worldviews where there's lots of opportunity and beauty that emerges. There's what I noticed in the presentations was this ability to hold and work in this multi-dimensional space. So we're doing multiple things at the same time. You are, yes, doing the work, but also looking at what needs to change. We're working internally and in our organizations to make change as well. So there's just lots and lots happening. And what I recognized in these presenters was a way and an ability to hold all of that and have the courage to stand strong in that space as well. And there was also conversations about the courage to call out what needs to be discarded or given up or sent to the compost heap. That's my metaphor there. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you. Thanks to everyone and for beautiful conversations and spaces to be able to have these conversations this morning.
Oh, kia ora, Darcy. Thank you very much for your whakaaro. We're going to go to Shane Ta'ala now. Shane is leading some amazing work at Statistics New Zealand, and he featured in our practice foundations our last practice foundations, and shared some really amazing kōrero during that. So I encourage you to go to the website and listen to that. But kei koe, Shane, mō tō whakaaro.
Kia ora koutou i te whānau, and kia ora, Ange. Yeah, I'm put off now because Ange was saying I lead some amazing work. I feel like I don't lead amazing work, but I work with people who do that amazing work. And so I feel really comfortable with it. I just wanted to acknowledge you too, Angie, for how you laid the foundation and setting up our three taonga speakers for us today. When you were speaking, when you set up, opened us, I thought about mihe mea kariko ana he whakakitenga ka mate te iwi, in terms of where there is no vision, the people perish. And I think that's been a real strong, all the amazing mahi we've seen shared with us today. When I look at that, it's evident that there's vision in that mahi, and people were driven by vision, and which is interesting because a lot of our agencies don't really operate to vision. And so I think that's all credit to them, but it's also another way of seeing, being, and actualizing. I also wanted to pick up on the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, as you mentioned, Ange. But for me, they can only be actualized when the kāwanatanga and tino rangatiratanga working together give effect to the provisions of the articles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi behind that work. And the reason I think that's important is I think many of us here have spent years working, trying to give effect or trying to highlight the importance of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, but it's always been around the principles. And I think many of the challenges that the people who shared with us today would have faced, and some of those challenges probably wouldn't have been evident, but I could feel the challenges and some of the blocks they would have had just to get their mahi over the line, tautoko and supported by different champions. But I'm hoping that how easy that might be for them and for us in future moving forward, if our kāwanatanga leaders, the ministers, our ELT members and our senior leader team members understood their obligations under the provisions of the Articles of the Treaty. And for us, Article 1, protecting the rights and interests of iwi Māori. So I think that stuck out for me too. Bearing in mind, I'm not very good at this kind of thing, so I'm really struggling here, and I've got too many notes. But I will just pick up on that point. One of the notes that came out from what I heard and felt was the importance of executive lead teams, senior lead teams, and our MPs, ministers in particular, that they need to drive the shift in thinking on the basis of understanding that Article 1 obligation. And the reason I think that's important is because when I look at the taonga that's been shared with us today, and what's been done on behalf, in the process of the elevation of that work, when it goes up to ELT for sign-off, or it goes to a ministerial at some stage, to anchor those programs so that it's not beg, borrow, steal for funding for a future state to make it sustainable. One of the things I thought about is, how is that work protected? How do we and how do you protect that work, but also the people who have framed and led that work in its journey up towards being pitched to ELT members to sign off on it? And the reason I say that is because a lot of the work that's been shared today actually does come from a it's a four-dimensional construct when they're talking about wayfinding, and what I mean by that is, as we all know, the way we do our work is only seen through a process lens, and often we're so process orientated, we can forget about the purpose behind the work or the process. And what's evident with the success of what I've seen today is because even if some others might have forgot about the purpose, the people who drove and were the architects behind this work, they never forgot the purpose. And I like how they were able to apply a people before programs context to the mahi, because that's evident right through to the end of when they spoke. And I want to finish on this last point. Te Tiriti o Waitangi is easier to be seen and treated like it's a compliance function, but it's an obligation. And I think that's one of the paradigm shifts that's required of our agencies, is to understand the provisions of the articles of the treaty, not just the principles, but also look at what we need to change at an institutional system structure process level to enliven and give effect to leaders like who we saw today, bring that work to life, but bring it to life in a way that it can reframe our agency system lens. And I can see that that's where this work is headed. So I'll leave that with you. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora, Shane. No good to hear Shane's part of a team that's leading some amazing work. Perhaps he'll be more comfortable if I say he's the architect of some very, very useful thinking and frameworks that help others to do this work as well. So kia ora, Shane, for your whakaaro. We're going to go to the panel in a moment, but if I can just reflect on something Shane was just saying, around it indeed is Te Tiriti is not a compliance issue. It's a constitutional responsibility. It's a systems responsibility, and it's a responsibility of tangata whenua and tangata Tiriti. And the allyship of tangata Tiriti in this work is so critical to move the work forward. So mihi ana ki a koutou ngā tangata Tiriti who come into the space and support us. But we're going to move to the panel now. We've got some questions to ask our 4 panel members. So aroha mai, there were lots of great questions, and remember, this is only the start of a conversation. This is only the start of creating a space where we have these very honest and brave conversations about what it takes to journey towards a Tiriti-centric and mātauranga-led Aotearoa. So sorry if we couldn't get to your question. We've had a look through the questions, and we've chosen some to ask our speakers. Maybe if you fellas are nice to them, they'll come back and do another session. Our questions for the panel, I think I'll start with Debs and Tanya. There was a question, Debs and Tanya, about what's an example of Māori outcomes in IR. So can you talk to that a little bit for the whānau, please?
Kia ora, Ange. I'll just speak to that question, and Shannon is in the background or might be able to bring the picture up for us. So in terms of outcomes, the outcomes that whānau Māori have spoken to is, I talked a little bit about it in our kōrero, oranga whānau, oranga tangata, and oranga whenua. And so oranga whānau, it supports the collective aspirations of whānau Māori. And I think the key thing to remember here is that these outcomes that I'm referring to, they're outcomes that are from, they're external outcomes, they're outcomes that whānau Māori are telling in land revenue. This is what is important to whānau Māori. So oranga whānau is about the collective aspirations of whānau, and some of the main things, outcomes that we'd see in there around whānau self-managing and empowered leaders, that whānau are strong and nurturing. Oranga whenua supports the holistic well-being of taiao, the natural environment, and so you're likely to see things in there around, if the whenua as well, the person as well, that whānau are responsible kaitiaki of their own living environment, living in natural environments. And oranga tangata supports the holistic well-being of people. So the most important outcomes that come out of that kōrero is around participating in language and culture and actively participating in te ao Māori. I hope that answered your pātai.
Kia ora, Tanya. Did you have anything to add, Debs or Kate?
Yeah, just in addition to that, it's understanding those outcomes are from external to IR. And so IR is, so asking the question, how does that, what do we do with that? And so the next step is, and that's the thing that they've been talking about and Tanya's been talking about, is how does IR contribute and support to meet or to head towards those outcomes? So it's actually understanding the difference. And we've been doing quite a lot of work within IR, understanding what that looks like and describing what that looks like. So there's quite a lot of work that's gone around that, and some tools like the rubric evaluative tool about what good looks like when IR is contributing and supporting Māori outcomes. So it's taking that step down from understanding, yes, this is the aspirations of Māori, and all of that work out there, but what is it that we can do in IR? And so there's a lot of work going on around that and what that looks like. Hope that helps.
Tēnā korua, and tēnā koe Shannon from IR, who didn't know that they will be online doing the slides and the tech work for us, so kia ora rā. And now a question for our amazing ACC whānau, and that's about, there was a beautiful comment in the chat about wakahaurua and kaumātua guiding us in understanding that it's not just what happens on the wakahaurua, but it's looking towards the star, and that the real work is about unity. So kei a koe, Timothy, to talk about how that experience of operationalising the wakahaurua and looking across two world views, and Justine as well, has been for you fellas. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Angie. Great partai, this one and all the others in there. I think what I read in this partai is sometimes the assumption or the practice that happens when it becomes solely Māori's responsibility to respond to the needs of Māori. And so through our work with Manini Tua, one, we needed to recognise the aspirations and goals and outcomes determined by whānau Māori. So having a dual outcomes framework helps to set that up and position it as a unique outcome set for Māori. But it's paired with a tangata tiriti outcome, which they're seen as complementary pairs that operate together. And through our practice of delivering on the outcomes, our tangata tiriti approaches are, I think Darcy mentioned earlier, that they encapsulate more than just a Pākehā perspective. It is about all other worldviews that are enabled here as a result of Te Tiriti. So that means that those universal approaches have to have an equity lens to it that need to also respond to the needs of Māori. And I think that there has been in the past experiences of leaving it for Māori to solve Māori challenges because they're the best place to do so. And that is absolutely true for kaupapa Māori approaches that align to our Māori outcomes. And that there's also a space for acknowledging what role tangata tiriti have in our non-Māori spaces to ensure that they're culturally safe and appropriate for Māori as well. I liked the other comment about reflecting that it's not just about a waka, it operates in a biome, in an environment that acknowledges the winds of change and the currents underneath us and the stars that guide us. And so our wakahaurua is our practice model. It's the thing that we're on, it's the thing that we do, the tools that we use, the knowledge that we apply in our mahi. Our outcomes are our whetū in the distance. They are the things that we strive for. And the motu along the way, they are milestones or they're points along the journey for us to recalibrate, to think about whether we have the right crew on board, whether we've got the right tools, and then to continue on that haringa to our outcomes that are in the distance. So I really like that provocation.
I'll just add quickly, that's awesome as always, Timothy, and from a tauiwi perspective, I think, as I lightly touched on in our slide deck, that the wakahaurua asks us to work differently as tauiwi, and it changes the perspective, and for some there's an initial sense of loss of control or power, but I'd suggest that it's an illusion anyway of control, and we can reframe our thinking to the opportunity that it provides, because like I said, the last 180 years haven't worked, so we've got nothing to lose. There's a whole much more to gain from working in this way.
Kia ora korua. Well, we haven't got long, but I'm trying to get one more question each for you fellas, if that's all right. So back to our crew from IRD. Lots of the whānau were asking generally about this type of work. How do you grow this work across an organisation? Debs and Tanya, would you like to talk about how you're thinking about or what's happening to grow this work across IR?
So I showed this in the kōrero that I gave earlier, and this might help to show how we've used the Māori outcomes insights and brought those insights in to sit them alongside the way a Western process operates. And so this table illustrates the expression of the two worldviews sitting side by side. And on the left-hand side, you'll what it is our current performance measures team's framework. It's what they use and how they operate. And it speaks to IR as a system, as an institution and organisation. And on the right-hand side, we have the insights from Māori outcomes. And so this team came to us and they said to us, you know, we haven't historically had outcomes or te ao Māori perspectives or Māori worldviews in the way that we operate. And because we're the people that measure performance and outcomes, they thought they wanted to do better. And so they pretty much put their arms up in the air and said, how can I bring a Māori perspective into the framework that I'm operating under? And so we created a safe space where both of us could have a kōrero to understand each other's jobs. And what we have is Inland Revenue's got a mission statement that speaks to a social and economic space. But for Māori, what they told us through the research was that they have these 4 domains, and the other 2 domains that are really important to them are around cultural and economic. Like, you can't cut them off at the knees because they speak to whakapapa. So our vision for Inland Revenue, it speaks to this world-class revenue organisation, whereas a Māori perspective, it speaks to Indigenous outcomes that support whānau Māori aspirations for wellbeing. IR's outcomes, they're about, you know, those government-funded programs and all the systemic kōrero that we know of. Whereas a Māori perspective expresses and gives reference to strengthening our understanding of te ao Māori as its starting point. And then later on it comes to Te Tiriti, which is the engager for Inland Revenue. Customer outcomes, though our Inland Revenue is about motivation, opportunity and capability, whereas whānau Māori told us, well, for them it's about oranga tangata whānau and Whenua, and to recognise Te Tiriti and better outcomes for Māori. And then our services is the same there, and we have this Māori perspective coming in that supports Māori worldviews and whānau practice that are naturalised throughout Inland Revenue. Our organisation health is about having this clear vision, strategy, culture, capability and capacity, whereas Inland Revenue want this embedded understanding of te ao Māori across the organisation. And then finally, our culture, Inland Revenue uses the terms of customer-centric, intelligence-led and agile and inclusive. I'm sure these are all the same kupu as every other agency. Whereas for whānau, in a Te Tiriti space, it's whānau focused and it's Māori values based. So those 3 top layers, our mission, our vision and our outcomes, that's a strategic conversation. So it impacts on our strategy people and our policy people to critically think about how they're supporting change within the way that they operate. And then we have a strategy, a Māori strategy, that speaks to practically how they can make that change. And then the next part, our customer outcomes, it sits with our intelligence team. So Te Mātauranga has all our senior Māori researchers in there, and they're the ones who protect and look after our Indigenous knowledge, mātauranga Māori. And then our services is about the operational way of how we implement things, and that too sits under another Māori strategy, which we call Mauri Ora Te Whānau. So collectively, all together, they contribute and support towards Te Tiriti.
Kia ora, Tanya. Debbie, did you want to add anything to that kōrero?
Oh, that was awesome. Thank you.
Tēnā kōrua, and we're going to run hard to time, but I'm going to ask Timothy and Justine one last question in closing. And there was a good question about about return on investment and organisational ways of measuring investment, traditional ways of measuring investment, and how does waka haurua, or the way that you're practicing, challenge that, or what is the way that it influences those traditional ways of thinking about investment and return?
Thanks, Angie. That's a good question. And before I go into that, sorry, there was a lot of questions about what does it look like in practice, what we've talked about, can you give us a tangible example? And we could go into some of those, but I'd suggest you reflect back on what Tanya shared in her presentation about the importance of the journey and the building of the capability, because what's tangible for us might not be tangible for you. And we often run, particularly Toby, we rush to the solution. What is the answer? What does it look like? And we need to think differently about how we get there. So in answer to this question, we are, as a tangible example, using the ROI to look at different ways in which to calculate it, informed by mātauranga Māori, but also look at it from a systems perspective, because our ROI looks at what ACC invest in. But actually, we know that there's a whole bunch of other system investments. So what would it look like if we thought about it from a system perspective and informed by mātauranga? And when we developed the ROI, which was way before our time at ACC, we didn't have a tangible way to measure success, but we created it. We didn't know what value looked like, but we assumed it was financial. And we believed it was necessary, so we built it. And so what we are trying to do is use the mātauranga that's available to us and sourcing it where it's not, so that we can inform how we calculate it from a more than purely financial, which has been seen as the measure of success. It is a challenge, but it's an opportunity for us to partner up with other agencies to look at it from a systems perspective and use the collective wisdom across the waka haurua to develop a new way of thinking about it with strengths-based measures and data included.
Thanks, Justine. Tiriti, did you have something to add?
Yeah, just one other piece to that. I think Justine touched on it briefly. The ROI and our approach to measurement from a financial basis is built into our legislation. So that's a requirement of our mahi. But what we're also doing is that our leadership, our board, they can also make decisions on all sorts of data sources. And so whilst the ROI is really important, part of our work is about answering the question, like, who defines what good looks like? And so what measures are we using that are valid and considered appropriate in our mahi? And so if we're creating dual outcomes with dual methodologies, it's really important that we're measuring the success of those initiatives by the worldviews and perspectives in which they were designed and built. So it's a challenge to the system to use Western reductionist methodologies on return on investments, on kaupapa Māori approaches that use a different methodology. So we're really exploring and testing and challenging, like, what might that look like? How do we use whānau stories to be able to evidence and demonstrate the change, as well as doing the return on investment as well. We think that building the protective factors of whānau to have strong cultural identity, a sense of connectedness, a sense of belonging in society, that those will help whānau prevent injuries and be in spaces that keep them well in the future.
Oh, kia ora kōrua. Well, tata tātou ki te mutunga. So we'll do a little bit of a wrap up now. Firstly, e mihi ana kia koutou ngā kai kōrero ngā rangatira o tēnei mahi. Nei rā te mihi kia koutou paki mai te whānau. Thank you very much to our speakers who took the time to prepare their kōrero out of their busy work schedules and took the time to be online with us. I want to thank everybody that came online and spent the morning with us in this journey towards a Te Tiriti centred in mātauranga-led Aotearoa. So give yourselves a little paki e te whānau. It's been lovely to spend time with you online. I hope that you are inspired to activate the articles of Te Tiriti and the work that you do wherever you do that work, as I have been inspired by our our kai kōrero. Also just want to thank our keynote listeners, one of whom was just asked this morning to do some listening. Thank you, Kimmy. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Das. Paki paki mai. And I'm just going to give a paki paki mai to the tech team and the co-design lab team that have been behind the scenes running around getting everything organised. Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to be with you today. I just want to give one special paki paki to Donna. It's her last day with us at the lab. The New Zealand Defence Force get to benefit from her mātauranga and her Ngāpuhi sense of humour from next week onwards. So lucky them. That's all I've got to say. But I just want to paki paki to Donna. I know lots of you have been online with the Practice Foundations, and just wish you all the best. All the best for your mahi there, Donna. We've got one slide left to show about next steps. I think it might be useful to show that choice. We're going to come back to you and just ask you a few questions about your experience today at the hui taumata. We really want to be intentional and careful about how we curate these spaces, because we think they're really important for us to have the conversations about the deep practice that's required to progress us towards Te Tiriti-led. So we'll really be grateful if you could give us some feedback, because we want to make these spaces really meaningful, productive for you and your practice. We're also going to share what we've covered today. We might be able to share a visual just before we leave the space today, the visual that Dylan's been working on. So we'll share the recording. And we might do some thinking about what could be next. Also feel free to join our Practice Foundations whānau. It's the first Wednesday of each month, and we do we have some really amazing people sharing their practice and their experiences from across Aotearoa. And our next one is the 5th of July, and it's focused on matariki. So no mai haere mai. If you want to register for that, you can register using the Auckland Co-Design Lab email there on the slide, or I think it's in your pre-pack. Do we want to show the visuals before we leave, team? Have we got space to give the camera to Dylan to see what the beautiful visuals are that's been created while we've been talking?
So this is very work in progress at the moment, but I'll be trying to capture what's been said. And then so this is ACC, I guess, and then we got the IR team.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much, Dylan. We'll share that with you guys post the hui taumata. So lovely to spend time with you fellas. And the last thing I'll do is I will hand it over to Donna to close with a karakia. Kia ora rai te tuakana.
Kia ora rai te tuakana. Tēnā i te whānau again. Thank you once again for joining us. Just reiterating the big mihi from our team and also the tuakana there. Again, we had great speakers, great listeners, but ko koutou te tino tēnei kaupapa, being able to weave into your koha. So thank you for the koha atu and koha mai that happened. And again, just reiterating what the tuakana said, send those emails through if you want to continue this conversation by joining our Practice Foundation sessions, because in all honesty, even though there was beautiful kōrero I was absolutely mesmerised with, you can't traverse this level of complexity in 3.5 hours, even though it was a big block together. So it'll be lovely to continue those conversations. But rungi i tērā, because we're close to time, kia tūkana tēnei kōrero katoa I runga I ngā araro o tāwhiri kia rere katu katou koutou. Be safe out there, everybody, and have a fabulous day. Mari ora kia tātou katoa hei konara.
Ka kite koutou.